Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm Virginia Sampson. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to talk to you about compassion. And it's an important subject for all of us. It's important to our survival as a species, quite frankly, and our ability to thrive for us personally and also for the children that we interact with. So today I'm focusing on children, but I start out a little bit talking about how it impacts all of us because we are the teachers of the children, and if we model it, they're going to follow it. If we don't model it, no matter what you say, as we know as parents and teachers, they're going to probably not do it. So we're going to start a little bit with about how you can incorporate it into your own life, and then how it will affect children. So I came to this. I'm actually an attorney for 36 years. I got involved in the subject of compassion. My husband was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease when my youngest child was 2 weeks old. So I quit working and I took care of him as a full-time caregiver. And that experience really opened my eyes to compassion, the need for it, and perhaps the lack of it in our culture. My children, my two middle, and I hope I don't cry, I'm sorry. My two middle children were actually in middle school. And they were, of course, acting out their pain and grief, and it was not met with much compassion at the school, either by the teachers or the administrators. My daughter was told she was stupid and worthless. They wanted to kick her out of school. So it was, and she's in her 30s now. She still bears the scars of that. So part of why I became interested in this is to see if we can't raise consciousness, this awareness about it, and see if we can't connect with each other and treat each other with compassion and caring rather than with the way my children were treated. And there's a lot more to the experience than that, but that's what I focus on because today we're talking about children. So this is from the Dalai Lama. I believe this, and I think the subject of compassion is being studied all over the country and all over the world at places like Stanford, Berkeley, and their conclusion is pretty much the same. Love and compassion are necessities. We tend to think that those are fluffy emotions relegated to, community service or church, but it really needs to be, if you're going to survive and you're going to thrive, it needs to be an integral part of your life. So what is compassion? All right, compassion is recognizing somebody's suffering or in distress. Right, so it doesn't have to be terrible distress. It can be they need something, right? They're upset. They're something simple. We tend to think of distress as something, a fire or something, but it can be something very simple where somebody's in a bit of distress, and that we are moved by seeing them in distress to help them. So the element of compassion that makes it different than empathy is that we're moved to help. We want to alleviate their distress, and we actually take action to do that. And again, that can be simple as well. So there are two types of compassion, and these are important to know. We have compassion directed to others. I think that's what we're all pretty much familiar with. And then you have self-compassion, which is just as important as compassion. And we'll talk about that later because that's going to help you to heal and to thrive and to be able to be more compassionate with other people as well. All right. So why is it important? I mean, why do we really care? I mean, our culture, we think of our culture as, in order to succeed, you have to compete with everybody else, right? You have to be better than everybody else. You have to, and some people think, trample on other people, right? That's how you're going to get ahead. You've got to get yourself ahead of the pack. But that's actually not true. We actually that's not how we're programmed. We are actually programmed to care for other people, to be compassionate. And that stems out of our when we first started to form communities, we have very vulnerable young, right? So when we first have our young, we need to form communities to care for them. They're very vulnerable. Mothers do need someone to help them, at least certainly in the days when we started to form communities to protect them, to collect food. So that's kind of how this all evolved. So we're not survival of the fittest in terms of our evolutionary biology, but we are connected. We do form caring communities, and that's one of our basic needs. Also, a lot of the researchers have been discovering that there's a huge mind-body connection. So we kind of thought that, you think one way and you feel another way. But what the researchers have established is that everything that we think or feel is manifested in our body. So in physical ways, biological ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but there's a huge mind-body connection. So if you're experiencing positive emotions, it's going to have a positive impact on your body. If you're experiencing negative emotions, it's going to have a negative impact on your body, biologically and psychologically as well. All right, so there's tremendous health benefits for compassion. Again, this is all, the researchers have done this at Berkeley, Stanford, and a lot of other universities all around the world. But people who are connected, and the reason compassion is important is it does help us connect to other people. They do live longer. They handle stress much better. They have more robust immune systems. And they do better fighting a variety of illnesses, including cancer. So it's critical. Here's some of the, so part of the reason that compassion is so beneficial to our health, there's a lot of mechanisms of it, but one of the ones I'll talk about today is it stimulates the vagus nerve. So that's a nerve that runs through from the top of our head down pretty much the whole way through our body. And they call that the caretaking nerve. And it controls things like our heart rate, our blood pressure. And so when you are acting compassionately or living compassionately, you are stimulating your vagus nerve. And when you stimulate your vagus nerve, good things happen. You reduce cellular inflammation. And cellular inflammation, we know, is a lot of the root causes of a lot of diseases, some of the autoimmune diseases and certain types of cancer. It lowers your blood pressure and your heart rate. It strengthens your immune system, and again, it increases your longevity and it improves the recovery. So the mechanism for a lot of the good things is stimulating the vagus nerve. Also, you produce oxytocin, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is a neurochemical that's a kind of a feel-good chemical that is also released when you engage in positive emotions like compassion. Interestingly enough, a lack of social connection is a strong risk factor for death, and it's a greater detriment to your health than smoking, obesity, or high blood pressure. All right. It also has mental health benefits. So it stimulates the pleasure centers in your brain. And I talked about oxytocin. It releases oxytocin, which they call the love hormone. It's just a hormone that makes you feel good. It soothes you. It gives you warmth. It makes you feel connected. It's released during a lot of activities. It's released during breastfeeding. It's released during sex, but it's also released during acts of compassion or when you live compassionately. And it has been shown, self-compassion, which we'll talk about, has been shown to decrease stress, right? And part of it is you're releasing oxytocin. And we know that depression and anxiety, a great part of it is linked to social isolation, right? People feel socially isolated. They're anxious, they're depressed. You focus only inward, you're not focusing outward, and this is what compassion does. It changes that dynamic. It helps with anxiety and depression. So, social connections, I don't think anybody here is probably surprised that are declining, right? We are more isolated as a culture. People do not have as many, the number of persons that people feel they can confide in has dramatically decreased. So people are feeling more isolated, more lonely. There's some of the research that says that the number of people have no one in whom they confide has tripled since 2004. Yeah. Here's some of the cultural detriments, right? Loneliness is deeply stigmatized, right? I did an experiment at an event I went to. This is a law event. And people were coming over to my table, and I forget what we were talking about. And I go, yeah, I've really had a hard time making friends here. I've really been lonely in this city that I moved to. And people just left. It was amazing. I had no one say, wow, I'm sorry to hear that. Or, literally they looked at you and they just booked. So it was just my little experiment of personal to see how true this is. But try it sometime. Start telling people you're really lonely, you feel isolated, and just see what their response is if you're interested in that. And of course, our culture of busyness. We're obsessed with being busy, right? If you're busy, you have a lot of status in our culture. Because, people need you, or you're important, or so when we're busy all the time, we don't have time to connect, right? We're focused on our 10,000 things we have on our to-do list, which really, quite frankly, will never get done, rather than interacting with people that that we're present with, that we see, that we know, strangers even. So I know it's funny, to-do list, right? You get 10 things off and then 20 get added. It's just endless. I don't know why we think we're ever going to get to the bottom of it, but it just never happens. So, and I do think a lot of that prevents us, well, they know that a lot of that prevents us from connecting with other people and interacting with other people in a compassionate way. All right. So we know, let's talk about education, right? I don't know how many are teachers. It's a very difficult job. It's a very stressful job. Teachers, I think, in the education system is being asked to do a lot more than they did when I was growing up, right? There's just a lot more to being a teacher and, running a school than there used to be. So, and these are some of the reasons, right? The students just, I think this is a cultural thing too. They're having a lot of issues, right? They've had increased rates of mental health issues. We know that bullying and aggression are a huge issue. The high school kids are engaging in high-risk behaviors like unprotected sex. They have increasing dropout rates. They're not engaging as much in the classroom as they used to. And particularly kids in inner city schools, right, are exposed to a lot of trauma, which they're going to bring with them to the school. I mean, you just can't separate that out from compartmentalize that. So these are, I think, some of the issues that the educators had indicated that teachers and schools are facing right now. And that if you're going to teach, I guess that means somehow you have to address these and see if you can't find some solutions to them. Because again, kids aren't in a vacuum, they are a whole person, and you've got to figure out ways to deal with this. So, as some children come, students come and they come from a culture or a family where they haven't learned compassion, right? I mean, and that seems to be more common than it used to be, and you kind of despair, like, oh my gosh, how do you, what can I do? They don't seem to understand the concept, right? Well, it can be taught. So DNA, the positive emotions are less heritable than the negative emotions. And so it's much easier, or it's much more possible to teach people positive emotions such as compassion. Here's some of the research that they've done. They're more subject to change from environmental input, right? So if they're exposed to it, they're more likely to pick up on it and learn it. Our ability to connect is formed in childhood, but again, if you don't have much of an ability to connect in your childhood, that can be overcome as you grow and into adulthood. You can learn because it is malleable, and it can be corrected. So know that that's one reason they're starting to teach compassion to children. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but that they understand that it does have a significant impact. All right, and for adults too, right? I mean, even if we're adults and we have dysfunctional ways of connecting, we can learn to be more compassionate as well. So, compassion training does impact your behavior. They've established that. Even a one-day compassion training can have significant effects on us, adults, and also certainly students, children. You can see that it's happening at Stanford. They've come up, they're developing curriculums around the country that they're trying to incorporate into schools. Some of this is social, emotional learning, but they don't have a uniform curriculum yet, so they're all a little bit different. At the basis of all of them is the idea that you can learn to be compassionate. And I don't know if I'd say learn, but you can develop that part of yourself, I would say. I think innately we are compassionate. We talked about that earlier. They've done some studies with toddlers that show that they just innately want to help other toddlers. So we do have that, we are born with that capacity, so it's more developing it than teaching it, right? It's there. Some people have it developed more than others, but it is present in all of us to some degree. All right. So here's what some of the keys. So one of the things you want to do is develop a positive school climate, right? There's places that kids are going to feel that they can be vulnerable and they can be compassionate, and places where they're going to feel defensive and negative and engage in negative behaviors. So here's some of the things that the key factors that they've determined in forming a compassionate community or a climate in the school that will help people to become more compassionate. And that includes teachers, administrators, and students, right? You want to be safe, right? So that's physical safety is important. You want to feel like there's clear rules about how you can behave so that you can feel safe emotionally and physically. All right, the relationships. You want to have relationships of trust and caring, and that includes hopefully among students, but certainly with your teachers and administrators. You want some, supportive learning, not negative learning. Constructive criticism, constructive feedback. And then you want institutional environment. You want to feel connected to your school, right? I think the idea of sports and pep rallies and those kinds of things is, it gives you an identity with your school. It helps you feel connected to other people. So you want to create a culture where people feel invested in the school, feel part of the school, connected to the school as well. These are the factors that you try to create to have a school climate to develop compassion. All right, so teacher development is critical, right? They found that teachers with weak social and emotional skills are going to have a detrimental effect on their students. That just goes whether you're a parent, a teacher, whoever you're interacting with young people. Again, like I said earlier, we model or don't model the qualities that we want our kids to emulate, and if you're a parent, you know that you say one thing and you do another, they're going to follow what you do, not what you say. So it's important for us to develop it as well in all areas of our life, but certainly as teachers. You can have a great deal of burnout, and teachers I know get burned out. My son was a teacher, he quit, right? And he wasn't a teacher for very long. And part of it, and this is my son that struggled, with school, and he wanted to help at-risk kids. So he went and taught at a middle school, and the lack of administrative support and the behavior issues, and of course the low pay, really drove him out. And it was really sad because he really loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And it just was a variety of factors. And he wasn't in it for more than 3 years, and he was burned out. So I can't imagine people that are in it longer. So part of what we're going to talk about today is to help prevent you from being burned out. It's a little beyond the scope of this, but I want to talk about it because it's very important, especially if you want to model it for kids and improve your own life, right? All right, so why do we want a culture of compassion? Well, actually, kids academically succeed better. They do much better academically if they're in a culture of compassion. You create connections with your teachers, right? And connections with teachers can inspire kids. We know that. You see movies about music teachers. I just saw a documentary about this music teacher that retired, and the students came from all over the world to do another performance for him because he had such an impact on their life. It can change kids' lives. We know that. And also it improves behavior. All right, they're invested, they're connected to you, and it reduces school suspensions by 1/2. So they found that suspensions actually not only detrimentally affect the student that's suspended, but also the students that are not suspended and the teachers. So they're trying to find ways to reduce suspensions, and they found that creating a culture of compassion and all that goes along with that really has a huge impact on having to suspend students. So they're talking about part of the reason it's difficult to incorporate this into the educational system is, we become focused on academic performance, right? That's what schools are about. And when you're talking about creating a culture of compassion, you're talking about the whole child, right? Helping them succeed or thrive as a whole person, not just academically. And so one of the reasons I think that's one of the reasons I think they're doing the social emotional learning programs. I don't know if you have that here. I know a lot of people here from San Bernardino. I live in Austin right now. They have that in their school district. Is the idea that your emotional well-being also is going to impact your academic success and your ability to succeed in life. We are not just a bunch of grades and tests. So we have to change our mindset a little bit and invest in this and think of the child as a whole person rather than just as an academic success. All right, so this is one I want to talk about for you, self-compassion. So self-compassion is compassion just directed at for ourselves, right? And the psychologists now have replaced self-esteem with self-compassion. They find that self-compassion is much more important because self-esteem basically involves judging yourself against other people in some level, right? Self-compassion is all about showing yourself kindness, just as you would to a friend or to a student, and it has huge effects, positive effects. This is one of the key factors they're finding in preventing burnout for teachers, caregivers, healthcare professionals, anybody who's experiencing some burnout. They've used it for some PTSD. It's all about showing some kindness to ourselves. I think in our culture we feel that that's a little bit vain or, kind of, but it's not. It's critical to your emotional and physical well-being. When you practice self-compassion, you will experience the same health benefits as when you practice compassion. Right, it's going to have a huge impact on yourself. So they've recognized 3 elements of it. And there's done a lot of studying on this. One is self-kindness, right, and that involves not criticizing yourself. Right, we're going to make mistakes. No one's perfect, and when you make a mistake, it's okay to offer yourself comfort, to not beat yourself up over it. As you would, you wouldn't do that to your friend. If your friend came to you and said they made a terrible mistake, would you say, "Oh, you're an idiot. I can't believe you did that." And then just start this whole mental exercise and, chastising yourself. You want to stop that kind of critical self-talk. You can recognize that you've made a mistake, or you've done something that you're not proud of, but, be gentle and kind to yourself. Don't criticize yourself. Don't judge yourself, right? You recognize that we're part of common humanity. So something bad happens, right? And we tend to focus inward, like we're the only person that's ever done this, or it's never happened to anybody but us. But no, the idea of self-compassion is to recognize that this is just part of the human experience. We are, everybody has gone through, other people have gone through this. Other people are going through this. We are connected to other people in this life that we are living, and that we are not isolated by this experience. So you want to go look outward, not inward. The other is mindfulness. So mindfulness is kind of a big buzzword. I think it kind of scares people, but it's just being aware of what's going on with you and your surroundings at a particular time, right? If you live mindfully, and it's very difficult in our busy culture to live mindfully. If you live mindfully, you're aware of what you are experiencing, what you're saying to yourself, right? The negative self-talk, and what's going on around you. And this is huge in terms of developing compassion and self-compassion. All right. So self-compassion, you're going to experience some of the same benefits, right? You're going to be less likely to be depressed or stressed out. It's going to make you much more resilient to stress. It's going to help soothe our pain. Again, you tap into the oxytocin when you comfort yourself. Just like when you comfort a friend or you comfort a student, you're tapping into your oxytocin. And we know oxytocin, when it's released in your body, creates feelings of trust, calm, safety, generosity, connectedness. And it improves how we talk to ourselves. We talked about that. So when you talk negatively to yourself, it's going to be activated. The amygdala is activated in your body, right? And you can release cortisol. And that's a neurochemical, kind of the opposite of oxytocin, that is released during stressful times. And that actually damages your body. Some of it is okay, but when you live under high levels of it constantly, that's what leads to a lot of disease, physical disease as well as mental health problems. So when you attack yourself, you're activating the amygdala and also probably releasing cortisol, which is not very good for you. And I tell you these things so maybe that'll help you when you find yourself in this spiral. You'll say, oh, it's good for my health. It's good for my mental health if I can stop this right now, right? They have found that rumination and those kinds of things are actually really unhealthy for you. All right. So I want to talk to you about creating a culture of compassion in school. And this is going to help you too, right? It's going to help you be more self-compassionate because you're going to be surrounded by compassion. Compassion is contagious. If you practice it, it's kind of like throwing a pebble into a pond, right? It just spreads. It comes back to you. So they found that the person who gives compassion also receives compassion. So it's a fascinating part of it. All right. So this is just from one educator who had some ideas about how to create a culture of compassion. There's lots of other ideas, but these are the key ones that she talked about. And I realized it's really difficult when you're in teaching and all the demands that you will have on you to do all of these things, but they're just suggestions and ideas. If you can just pick a couple of out and focus on it and expand upon that, it's something that maybe appeals to you here, might be a good way to start. Compassion for yourself and compassion for the students, creating that culture in your classroom. I think, you can read it. You want to encourage them, right? We don't want to criticize them. We know that's very detrimental to them. We want to smile as much as possible. We want to be positive. Right? We want people to want to come to your classroom, right? Because it's a positive, happy place. All right. Hugging, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I'll say that now hugging is very important and only where it's appropriate, but hugging releases oxytocin. Touch releases oxytocin. So even if you put a hand on a shoulder or you hug a student, it really has a positive effect on them. So obviously you want to be courteous, you want to respect your students at all times, and you're going to expect the same for yourselves, right? That's part of self-compassion. You want to make them feel safe. We talked about safety. And of course, you want them to own some of their learning, right? That you want them to be invested in it so that they'll be responsible for it. That creates a good culture. You want to appreciate other people. Everybody's different, right? But we want to appreciate those differences. Obviously, you try to remain calm all the time. That's not always possible. I know as a parent, certainly not. And check and see if anyone is really distressed, right, on a particular day, if they look different. Even if you just say, how are you, is something you want to talk to me about, kids are usually lots of times going to respond no. But it's the idea that you've shown that you care, right? It's the same with your kids. They may come back later and talk to you about it, but I think it makes them feel that someone cares about them, and that's what a lot of this process is about. You want the students to feel like someone cares about them and what's going on in their life, even if they're not willing to talk to you about it at that particular time. Of course, and then you want to try to do what's best for everybody in their best interest. All right. So these will apply to self-compassion as well as compassion. There's certain exercises that are going to help you develop compassion and self-compassion. Let's talk about compassion development exercises. So, and these I have, if you've taken any of my information, feel free to email me because there's specific steps and handouts I have that you'll maximize the benefits of these practices, right? So active listening. This is all across your life, right? How do you listen to people? And that's part of our problem in our busy culture is we don't listen, right? We're either thinking about what we're going to say, or we're going to think about the 5 things we've got to do as soon as this person stops talking, right? I mean, we all do it because we're too busy. So it's stopping, and it's amazing how little time it takes, but just stop and listen to what the other person is saying. That validates them. And they know whether you're listening or not, right? Your kids know whether you're listening or whether you're thinking about something else. That really validates them. Listen to what's going on. You don't necessarily have to offer them solutions. They're not necessarily looking for solutions, and sometimes that's even detrimental to your relationship, but listen to what's going on with them. Just offer them some compassion. I care about what happens to you. I'm sorry you're going through this right now. And it's something that you would say to a friend. Offer it to yourself too when something's going on in your life. If there's no friend around to comfort you, you can do the same for yourself. Offer yourself the compassion. Expect your friends to listen to you, but interact with people that are going to actively listen to you also when you have an issue. Loving kindness meditation is an exercise that you can customize for yourself, but applies to developing compassion as well as self-compassion, right? So you are going to think of people, take a couple of minutes, and you think about people that love you, right? And you feel their love for you. Then you start feeling love, and then you start loving yourself, and then you start sending out loving kindness to your students, your family, the world, however you feel most comfortable with it. And they found that has a huge effect just in developing compassion because you feel a lot of love and warmth as you experience all of this in your body. Sometimes, if I'm doing it, if I'm really stressed out, I actually put my hand on my heart. You can do this in the grocery store line, in the car. It's, you don't necessarily have to do it at a particular time every day. It's like anything else, the more you do it and the more time you dedicate to it, the more the effect is going to be for you. But if you're starting out and you're not sure, just practice it a little bit. And like I said, I'm happy to share my handouts with you, but just practice it, develop it for yourself. But I try to do it every morning when I wake up. It kind of just sets you for the day, feeling connected to people and hopefully being loving to people as you interact with them during the day. When I go out, when I leave the office, I try to, it sounds silly, but I try to put on my compassion cap, right? And I remind myself that my goal is to be kind and compassionate to everybody I meet that day, not to get everything done on my to-do list. And so I try to start my focus of the day that way. Now, I'm not saying I'm always successful at it, but that's how I start. Before I even get into the car to go anywhere, that's my mindset. So, and the loving kindness meditation does help with that. Okay, touching appropriately, we talked about that, because it releases oxytocin. It makes people, and it's easier to be actively listening, right? If you touch someone, if you look in their eyes, there's a lot of body language that goes along with actively listening. And putting your hand on someone's arm usually means to them you're engaged, and it does help you engage more. So there's a lot to be said for the body language that you do when you're listening to people. Practicing mindfulness. So mindfulness, there's an informal and a formal, right? Formal is kind of a meditation, and they found that meditating actually alters the chemistry in your brain for the better. But I realize a lot of us don't have the time to do that, or not sure we want to do that yet. So you can informally just be mindful and just stop during the day and say, what am I experiencing right now? Am I frustrated? Am I upset? You know, just be aware of it, because I think they've proven that when you repress it, it can affect how you interact with other people. So part of being aware is it calms your system, right? Reduces your stress, but you can acknowledge how you feel. And if you're doing self-criticism, talk like that to yourself, or saying something in your mind about somebody you're interacting with. Sometimes we don't even realize we're doing that. So if we're aware of what's going on with us emotionally and aware of our surroundings, it has a huge impact on our health and how you interact with other people as well. So, and performing random acts of kindness, that's, it's kind of funny, but it does, just do something kind for somebody randomly. We've seen this in the news, people pay for somebody's drink at Starbucks, or, anything like that. It really has an amazing effect for you as well. That's one thing about compassion. You may be compassionate for somebody, and you may get upset because you're like, oh gosh, they really didn't even appreciate that, which is not part of it, but we're human. But it has a positive impact on you, even if nobody cares if you're being compassionate to them. So just think about it that way. It does have an effect on you. Like sometimes I try to go in, like sometimes when I go to the grocery store, I try to make a point of asking the cash register person, the person who's checking out, how are you today? And I mean, it's amazing how their whole body language changes, because I think we tend to treat people like robots, right? Oh, you're just here to serve me, or you're just, oh, you're paid for that. That doesn't mean I have to be nice to you, right? I don't think we necessarily consciously think that, but I think that's the message we send to people, right? Well, you're paid, you're here. I don't really need to do anything else for you. That's part of what's going on right now, is our not being aware and mindful of other people in our lives and interacting with them in a positive way. Just a hello or a smile can have a huge impact on someone. All right, self-compassion. These are some things that you can do. Now, if you're really stressed out, give yourself a hug, right? I know it sounds weird, and you'll feel weird doing it. But if you don't have a friend around to give you a hug and you're just having a meltdown over something, you just reach your arms around and give yourself a hug. You'll release oxytocin. It will be very soothing. All right? If you want to do something on a deeper level, there's certainly things you can do. Obviously, this is just an introduction, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg for you, but you can write yourself a letter. Maybe you're going to write about, there's structured ways that the social scientists have come up with and psychologists that will maximize the benefit to you, but the whole idea is to write a letter to yourself, kind of forgiving yourself, recognizing, whatever it is that upsets you about yourself, and those kinds of things. You write a letter. It's kind of a little bit like journaling, but they've got specific criteria that I think will maximize the benefits of writing a letter for you in terms of developing self-compassion. And these self-compassion breaks I tell people when I speak to caregivers, just take a self-compassion break instead of a coffee break, right? So you're going to sit down and you're going to go through those 3 steps. You're going to be mindful, what's going on with me right now, okay? You're going to be kind to yourself. You're going to stop the negative criticism and the negative self-talk. You're going to offer yourself words of encouragement, warmth, love, all right, and then you're going to put it in perspective. This is not the end of the world. Other people are going through this. This will pass. Whatever works for you. And you can find affirmations that will help you through those times. And they find when you take self-compassion breaks, it can be as simple as short as 5 minutes. If you build on those, it does help you build self-compassion and help you reap the benefits of the health benefits, psychological and physical health benefits of showing compassion to yourself. And obviously it's going to help you be more compassionate with other people because you are feeling good about yourself, right? You have filled yourself up. You're not feeling depleted, so you have more to offer to other people. So if you take a few things away, just when you think about our culture, we need to get away from that negativity that we are competing with each other and that we have to kind of squash the other person to succeed. No, we need to connect with people. If you are compassionate, if you live a compassionate life, you are more likely to thrive in every area of your life. That includes professionally. Businesses that have a compassionate culture are much more successful, and that includes they make more money. Obviously in your family, your community, your school, being compassionate and building strong connections is really at the heart of all of our success, our ability to survive and our ability to thrive. And one reason is because when we are compassionate, we tap into our deepest biological needs, right? We are programmed to connect. And when we are compassionate, one of the reasons that it's so good for us is it builds meaningful connections with other people. And that taps into one of our biological needs, which is to connect. Again, it manifests itself in positive ways. We release oxytocin, right? We reduce the cortisol in our systems. We can reduce our heart rate, our blood pressure, cellular inflammation, all of the things. We reduce a sense of it. We can reduce our anxiety and feeling isolated and depressed by being connected and by practicing compassion. And also for students, we know that it actually does impact they do succeed academically when they are in a culture of compassion. As well as you set a foundation for later success in life because you have helped them develop compassion and self-compassion, which is going to help them succeed in every area of their life, whether it's their family, their community, their business. As a leader, compassionate leaders are always the most successful leaders. There's a bunch of research right now on how cultures of compassion affect businesses, and they know that they do improve the bottom line. They actually make more money. Again, as we talked about, compassion is felt by you, the giver, and also the receiver. So even if someone isn't responsive like you would like them to be, you are getting a benefit from just doing it, and it is contagious. So think about that. Telomeres are interesting. I just thought I'd throw this in. So there's a scientist in Australia, interestingly enough, who became fascinated with pond scum when she was a kid. I mean, who knew, right? So as she got older, she studied it. She couldn't figure out why this pond scum never went away. You know how if you're in a pond, it just kind of floats all around. You just can't seem to get rid of it. Well, apparently that led to her discovery of telomeres. And telomeres they're at the end of our DNA, right? And they have discovered that when telomeres start to shorten, our cells age, and we age. And to put it briefly, she has a whole book on it, she has a TED Talk, but to put it briefly, when your telomeres remain long, you live longer and you are healthier, and one of the factors that can help your telomeres to stay long is social connections and compassion. So here's just a few resources for you, and I have more if you're interested. At this point in time, I'll take some questions. Oh, I'm superhero. So when I went through this with my kids at the school, and they're a little bit fascinated with superheroes, right? That's kind of big right now. And I got a little bit tired of superheroes that were superheroes because they were beating people up or hitting people. I mean, you know, I realize they're doing it for good, but they're still engaged in physical altercations and some violence, right? So I wanted a superhero who was compassionate because he was loving, or she was loving, and she was kind, and she was thoughtful, and she thought about others. So this is my C is for compassion. I'm the compassionate superhero. I'm Samantha. So the book I've written is about Sam or Samantha, right? We have to use he grammatically, but it's the pictures and everything are racially and they're all diverse. So it can be for anybody, any family, any kid. But anyway, so I'm superhero Samantha, and this is my C for compassion. And Samantha or Sam became a superhero. His mom made him a superhero because he was kind and thoughtful and caring. She made a costume for him, which is similar to this. So I hope that we can start rewarding kids for being compassionate and kind and thoughtful. I think we certainly need a lot of that in our community, and you need to do that for yourself too. I can't stress that enough. Please start to practice some simple acts of self-compassion. It will make a huge difference in your life and your ability to be compassionate as you interact with other people.